Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Western Spirit. Today, we have a very special guest. Rajiv Malhotra is an author, thinker, and founder of the Infinity Foundation, known for books like Breaking India and Being Different. Rajiv explores Indian philosophy, cultural identity, and the global impact of Western narratives on those issues. Rajiv is one of the most, and I think this is just from this is not the official introduction, but my own feelings. Rajiv is one of the most important voices in the culture wars from a Hindu perspective in the West. And his books are widely read not only by the public in India, but also and around the world, obviously, but also by policymakers and people who make decisions in the West and in India. And he's someone whose perspective is very much needed. And I'm honored to have you, Rajiv, with us. So it's a pleasure and honor to speak with you today.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be on this show and look forward to a good conversation.
Likewise, Rajiv, I want to ask you just before we get into any specific, questions about what's happening. We've just gone through an election in America. It seems like all Western countries the political establishments are crumbling. Canada, Great Britain now with their scandal with the grooming gangs. Austria, the government is falling. In France, the right wing Le Pen is getting power. The whole West seems to be going through something very unique right now. We're in a really weird moment. How do you look at the Western societies through your perspective with this whole culture war that's coming to a head right now?
You know, I lived in the United States for 55 years and have my own identity that I was born into. And I've been a student of Western society very systematically, both as a businessman, as a corporate person, as an entrepreneur, but also now for the last 35 years as a scholar, as a full-time scholar. So I see a lot of great features about Western civilization. I want Western civilization to be successful. I do believe that America should become great again, like it once was. I do subscribe to that. So the all my life, except for the last 10 years, I used to be a Democrat. I used to be liberal. And I'm a logical person. I'm trained in science and technology, and I believe in meritocracy. And, I'm a product of that. My success is testimony to the openness in Western society. So I really like a lot about that. But however, what has happened, and I attribute this to Obama era kind of accentuated it. What has happened is this whole wokeism, which is a rise of anti-meritocracy. I mean, this is basically Marxism saying that Marx said that it's all about the thesis, antithesis is all about oppressor and oppressed in an economic sense. He did not apply to religion, he did not apply to race, he did not apply to sexual orientation, etc. But what happened is after the cultural Marxism, after the Frankfurt School in the Second World War, they kind of created Marxism 2.0, where the means of production that are abusive is not just economic means of production, but also means of production in terms of education and media. So all of those have to be dismantled also because they serve the oppressor. That's what the theory
Yes.
became. And it further changed after 9/11, the Muslims were in trouble. For a while in the United States, people were attacking Muslims all over the place, which is unfortunate because everybody should be safe. But people were attacking the Muslims, and Muslims were on the back foot. So the question is, how come today the Muslims are sort of at the front in riots against Jews, against Hindus, and on campuses? This transformation after 9/11 needs to be understood. How did this happen that people who were actually, the underdogs in the cultural wars were now kind of dominant, or at least on the Democratic and the liberal side? And now we see a backlash against them in the whole Trump wave. So the way this happened, this woke thing came about, is that there was always this Marxism in the academy, and it wasn't getting traction. But then after this Black Lives Matter, after this whole thing that happened to George Floyd, which is very tragic, there was a moment of kind of white guilt and a whole lot of liberal guilt, and that expanded the Marxism to cover race. Because
Yes.
previously it was economic. It was Marx himself said he didn't want it to be race, but suddenly it became like the oppressed are the blacks and the oppressors are the whites. And the Muslims joined in with the blacks and said, okay, we are also oppressed, and the oppressors are Jews. So you see, previously the Palestine issue, the ultra liberals on campuses were anti Zionism and anti Judaism and for Palestinians. They were there, but that was contained in these isolated campuses. So America had a certain cultural animosity with the Jews, but it was contained within academic campuses. It was like the cancer had not spread yet, in a sense. Okay, but what happened with this new thing going public and everybody wanting the sympathy with the blacks? This whole, they didn't realize that this is Marxism. It's one thing to support Black Lives Matter, which, by the way, I support it. I fund it, Black Lives Matter, because I really believe that the blacks need help and there was injustice against them. But I didn't realize that this is going to become taken over by the left. So the alliance of left and blacks. Now the Muslims came in. Now it became an alliance of left and Muslims. And then soon before you know it, the Khalistanis who are anti-India, they joined in. The Dalits joined in against upper caste or the Indian class warfare got imported into the United States, and Oprah joined in this. So what has happened is, I think the incubator of this whole backlash against Western societies and the Western liberalism is this thing I've called woke. And I've
Yes.
just described in a summary way. I've written a lot about it, but this is the origin of woke, why it started, and so it's gone out of hand. So this woke,
And Rajiv,
yeah,
can I just interrupt 1 second about that? Is that the basic, I guess, for people who aren't ideological and they buy into this woke thing, the basic thesis would be just on a gut level is that if one group is more successful than the other group, and usually it's broke down by racial identities, then that group must be oppressing the less successful group. And that is why, for example, Jews and Indians who are very successful, hardworking people, very put much emphasis on education and climbing up the ladder and meritocracy, they are considered the oppressors. Whereas other groups who, for different reasons, it doesn't even matter, are less, for example, successful business wise or political wise, whatever it is, they're considered the oppressed. And so it doesn't even matter what your color is at the end of the day.
yeah, I think, and that's a basic application of Marxism's
Yes.
oppressor versus oppressed. They just applied it to different groups now, and
Hmm.
so this has gone out of hand. And I think that the pendulum is swinging the other way, and you're seeing in one country after another, you are seeing the backlash against ultra liberalism, ultra left. And I say it as a true liberal. I think these are pseudo liberal because that's not true liberalism. Liberalism is supposed to be allow you to question things, but they have
Yes.
cancel culture, which means a guy like me, rather than questioning, asking me to prove my thesis, and I'll be happy to give evidence, and I'll be happy to be proven wrong. I mean, that is what a liberal is supposed to be.
Yes.
But right now, they are kind of dogmatic people, in the sense that the conclusion has been reached, and how you get there is less important. There is this high priests of the woke movement; they cannot be questioned. It's sort of like a big cult, and so people. I mean, I have faced cancel culture. The term is new, but I have faced cancel culture for 30 years. 30 years, because
Yes.
as a Hindu, I would go and talk about what the biases are in the academy, which come from the colonial era, and the Americans took over that bias and made it even worse. And I used to, at one point in time, my foundation gave a few $1 million grants to places like Harvard, Columbia University, Princeton University, University of California, University of Texas. We funded a whole lot of that. And we funded it in order to have more open discussion so that people from within my tradition could come and explain our point of view to the academicians who were biased. But I found that they wanted all the money, but they didn't want to be opened up. They didn't want to be questioned. I mean, so they would say my foundation, which is Infinity Foundation, is most welcome. It's one of the few giving so much money. We welcome it. But as far as I'm concerned, rather than listening, rather than giving me a seat at the table to argue my point of view, because I'm well informed about my culture, they would kind of want to shut me off. And so after spending a lot of money, a lot of time, and understanding how this ecosystem works, what's the politics inside it, I decided, you know what, I'm actually going to turn around and start becoming a critic. So I started writing my own books and writing my own, and became very successful in mobilizing the public opinion of our diaspora and Hindus in India against the portrayals which I call Hinduphobia, which is sort of like anti-Semitism. So
Yes.
I have lived through this myself. It is not some textbook thing that I read in somewhere. I have actually faced these people. I have had fights with them, encounters with them. I have known them. I have funded them. So I understand the entire woke movement as it pertains to Hinduphobia.
Yes, and I just want to just say one thing about that is about the universities and funding. I interviewed Bill Ackman not too long ago for the paper, and he also for Harvard. He was this,
Yes,
big. He's a billionaire. And he was funding Harvard and giving them tons of money. And then suddenly he realized, and he said he never understood what this DEI thing was, and he thought it was just harmless. And suddenly he starts seeing these crazy protesters full of hate, violence, and he's trying to understand where is this all coming from, and he's studying, and he realizes that his money has been going to these organizations in Harvard, for example, that a day after October 7th were signing letters basically saying that Israel can't respond and deserves what it got. And then he realized that he had to stop giving the money, and that's where the whole story started coming from. So you're very early to the game, so to speak, about this kind of stuff.
yes.
So I want to ask you also something interesting. We've been seeing in the last few years a number, and especially now with the Trump administration, of people of Hindu descent or Indian descent becoming prominent world leaders. Rishi Sunak in England was just the prime minister, and he made it very a point of interest that to say that he's Hindu and he was proud of his culture. We saw Tulsi Gabbard, who you've spoken out in favor of her, and saying that they should give her a fair shot, and Vivek, who was on our show also. Um, and so, and I'm going to ask you a little bit about the hatred, but before that, what do you think? Does it signify anything that all these people of Hindu descent are coming into the public eye now and are being accepted mostly? We'll talk about the hate soon, but before that, it's
Yeah,
the acceptance. And at the same time, before just to finish off, it's when India itself is becoming more and more successful on the world stage in the last decade.
yeah.
It's India. I wrote this down here just to. It's projected to be the third largest economy in the next few years. We'll see when, but it's not a joke. It's the most populated country in the world. So as these two things are happening, how do you see it?
So, I would add to that list also Usha Vance, the vice president's
Yes,
wife.
yes,
I mean, she's a very well educated, very top lawyer, and she doesn't have a cabinet position, but she's going to play a role being the vice president's wife, and they're very active in all this. And I would also say Kash Patel, the person
yes,
nominated for the FBI. And there's Jay Bhattacharya, he's the FDA. He is, the successor to the
right.
famous Dr. Fauci. So there's a lot of Hindus now. See, the
Oh, there's
interesting thing,
another one. One second. There's another one. I think isn't Harmeet Dillon also of something
Harmeet
Hindu?
Dillon is a Sikh.
Okay.
He's a Sikh. So the thing is that one thing in common to all of them is that none of them got in because of identity politics. Each of them got in
Exactly.
because of their own merit. I mean, somebody is very good in this and they got in. Somebody is very good in that and they got in. They were all selected as individuals. There was no Hindu pack or some kind of a political group pushing them. And this is very important. That I must say the credit goes to Trump for being true a meritocracy oriented person. You can disagree with him. I have some agreements, disagreements, all that. And as my experience has been, at least with the transition team, they're very open to discussion and dissent. I've been part of a few conference calls with some of the people who've been nominated because they want to get opinions, they want to get feedback, and they want ideas and brainstorms. And I find that they're very open to all sorts of conversations, at least at this stage, which I did not find in the Democratic Party because there it's more like a cult, you follow the line. So I think this openness that uh, Trump has brought into the Republican Party has allowed a lot of Hindus to get in, to answer your question. So it's not the strange thing is there are a lot of commonalities between Hindus and Jews. We'll get into that. One of the differences is that Jews are organized in the United
Yes.
States. Jews are very organized. They fund collectively. They have the AJC. All these kind of organizations are very very powerful. Whereas Hindus are not. Hindus are sort of everybody going off on their own, and more worried about their success and their kids, and they're climbing the meritocracy ladder quite successfully, but they're not collectively asserting power, not yet at least. So that has good things and bad things. It means that you don't have to be responsible for anybody else but yourself, and go and work hard and get in and climb the ladder. But it also means that we don't get the benefit of each other together. We don't get that like the Jewish do for each other, the Hindus have not yet been doing for each other.
And also, Rajiv, what about India itself? I know that you it's not exactly the same thing, but how do you look at it from as someone who is of Indian descent, who grew up in India and moved to America? You said 50 plus years ago or so. Tell me exactly the number. I don't want, but how do you look back at your home country with all these people there that are reading your stuff, that are watching your stuff from there? What do you look back and say at India and say, I'm proud of where India is now?
Well, I would say in many ways I'm very proud. I didn't expect that India would become a high growth country and a free enterprise country. I was raised at a time it was very socialist and very,
Yes.
in the Soviet camp and those kind of things. Uh, when I came to the United States as a student, a graduate student, to do my PhD in physics at the age of 20, I was allowed to take $50. That's it. You could take $50 out of the country, controls on restrictions and all that. And I arrived in the middle of the night at a Greyhound station at a Washington airport, and moved to a Greyhound station to take a bus. And, I mean, I started out like that. And India was very poor, and there were no Indians here in the United States, very, very few Indians here in those days. So I had to sort of start from square one entirely on my own at a very young age.
Yeah.
But I found the Americans to be very open. Now, as far as India is concerned, India has moved from a very closed economic system to very free enterprise, a lot of stuff going on, and high growth, and a lot of technology emphasis, educational emphasis. Because when I was raised, the good education systems were owned by Christian missionaries. Because 200 years ago they dismantled a very very successful Indian learning system. India had a very good education system traditionally, but the British came and they de-Sanskritized, removed the Sanskrit, which is sort of like the equivalent to Hebrew. They removed the Sanskrit and brought in English, and trained generation after generation of Indians to serve the British Empire. So Indians were the civil servants. Indians were the sepoys, the guys carrying guns and working for the British Army. You probably most of your listeners would not know that in World War One, the largest from the largest group of soldiers in the Allies were Indians, and the same thing in World War II. Before the Americans joined, before the Americans entered the war, the largest number of soldiers serving the British Army, the whole Allies, were actually Indians. And there are so many cemeteries in Europe, in France and Britain, for Indians who got killed. And there was no memorial to them. There's no big, thing. This is part of history. Books are written on it, but it's obscure history. So Indians have been used a lot by all sorts of people. British used Indians to fight their army, their wars all over the world. So Indians have this kind of a colonial mindset. Before the British were the Mughals, the Muslims. So between the Muslim rule and the British rule, it's over 1,000 years of slavery. You see, so, Indians haven't quite grown out of that. But now
Hmm.
Indians have confidence that, hey, you know what? My kid goes here, and I can own this, and I'm making money. And so sort of so financial success, and also based on intellectual success, educational success leading to financial success, is kind of intellect is sort of psychologically empowering.
Yes.
You feel like, hey, you know what, we are good, we're not that bad. So now that's perfect timing for someone like me to say, hey, we have to decolonize our entire education system. We have to decolonize what's written about us, our history, all the Hinduphobia that's out there. We have to go beyond just being financially successful. We also have to assert our cultural identity. So I think that's the state of affairs in India. That it is moving beyond just financial success, and now it's beginning to sort of rediscover its culture and heritage.
Uh-huh. Wow. And you, as we said in the opening, have a lot of readers in India, people who follow you, and not only just people, not to be like not nice, but not just people on the street, so to speak, like me, but also policymakers who know what you're saying and what your policy recommendations are. So it's important to hear you say that. Let me just ask you one more question about the leaders in the West who are of Hindu descent. So when I interviewed Vivek Ramaswamy, I did some research before, and I started seeing something very interesting, that when he was running for president in the Republican primary, there suddenly came, I'm just reading stuff that I wrote, like he's an idol. People started writing that he's an idol worshiper, that he's not American, in I'm quoting, that he's there was other really derogatory statements of, and it reminded me a little bit of growing up as a Jewish person in Brooklyn, people cursing you in Jewish slurs. So a little bit, it sort of reminded me of what, like, my grandparents are Holocaust survivors. Not to make the comparison, but before the Holocaust, the Poles used to call them Žid and all these other bad names, and it sort of reminded me of that. So what are we missing here? Because on the one hand, he's going to become, with Elon Musk, the head of Doge, and like you said, Cash Patel and all these other people. And on the other hand, there is a sort of underlying hatred of people of Hindu descent in America.
Yes. So, much of my life in this country, when I started my foundation, one of the things I studied was white supremacy and Christian extremism, the whole idea that it's a Christian nation,
Hmm.
and non-Christians are not welcome. They should be like second class. And what feeds that is this business of being idolatry and all that stuff. So that is a fringe of American society, which has now become more important because they supported Trump. They supported Trump wholeheartedly. So Trump is holding on to a coalition of disparate voices within his own party. Uh, I see two camps in the Trump coalition. I call it the Trump coalition, the new Republican Party. On the one hand, you have the technocrats, which is Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy and all the guys who are based on meritocracy, and their agenda is very pragmatic. It's not religion oriented and it's not race oriented. Their agenda is very pragmatic. They want to beat China and become once again the leading military industrial complex like America was. That's a term that Eisenhower coined. And, over the years, China has become stronger and stronger in their
Yes.
military industrial complex. And there is very serious concern that it's getting too late. We ought to catch up. And, so these guys, the technocrat part of the MAGA, the Republican Party, are very open. They want to do practical things like close the border, not because of racism, but because it's economically stupid thing to do to have the border open. And they want to fight the Chinese not because of some race thing, but because it's economically foolish to do. Like they're also fighting Canada. It's certainly not because of race or religion. They're fighting Canada pure and simple. It's a pragmatic thing to do. And they're fighting European countries also, NATO and all these countries. So I think there is that part of the Republican Party, which I would support, because their agendas are very logical. They're intelligent people. But there is the other side of the Republican Party also, which is the white supremacy and Christian nationalism, and their belief that the non-Christians and non-whites don't belong, and they want it to be a white Christian nation that exists. In fact, there's a big article in CNN on that this morning, and
And
I've sent it
Rajiv,
to.
yeah, I just wanted to interject and give an example, just a very interesting example. And you know the guy's name more than I do. I don't remember his exact name. So what happened was, there's this whole argument about the H2 visas, about the workers of
H1B, H1B.
H1B. Sorry. And so what happened was, Elon Musk basically said, we need these H1B visas to bring in skilled workers that in tech and all these other places where probably isn't enough American workers in those fields. American companies need this. And then you had a backlash against it by a number of these types of, I wouldn't say they're all white nationalists, but a lot of them definitely are tilting to that area. And also a lot of like people who like instinctively say any workers are bad, anyone from outside is bad, and without any rational like thought about, making pros and cons about all these issues. People that like instinctively are against anyone who might be a little bit different or new or etc. And one of the people who I think is going to be in the Trump administration is a person of Hindu descent. I forgot his name. And he was saying, he wrote that this is something important and this, that, and the backlash he got. I forgot his name, but it doesn't even matter. It just goes to show the backlash he got as for anti-Hindu backlash. Like literally, he's not one of us. Why would he know? He's anti-American, and this is a guy that's going to work in the Trump administration. So it's just going to shows you how it's a knee-jerk reaction by a lot of these people.
Yeah, so I think he was a guy that was head of AI, hired by, brought in by Musk. Musk brought
Yes,
him
yes,
in.
exactly.
Yeah, so this is the sad thing. So I think that Trump has a difficult job to do because he needs the votes of all of these. He's got a thin majority, and he cannot afford to piss off anybody. And he has a very aggressive agenda. He wants to put it through. So he has this dancing game to do where, on some days he's going to support these very ultra white supremacy, Christian white kind of people, and on the other side support the more kind of technocrat and meritocracy oriented people. So my feeling is that Trump himself is is somebody who's into meritocracy because he himself is a product of very aggressive meritocracy. No nonsense. If you're better, you beat the hell out of the other guy and win. And he's always had dealings with people of all ethnicities and all that. Whatever works for him, whatever makes him money. He's a very practical guy to get ahead, beat everybody at the game and win, and bring on your team whoever. When he ran The Apprentice, you could see there was no favorite color, religion, none of those. He's just no nonsense. So I think that's Trump himself. But Trump's also a very clever game player. He knows how to play the game and who all he has to appease. So this is going to be a very tricky but a very important thing for Trump to do. My feeling is like even on this H-1B, he let everybody say and fight and all that, but in the end, he came in favor of let's have
Yes,
the H-1B visa because we need it. We are very pragmatic people. So this is the big uncertainty, the internal cultural war within within the Republican Party is something to talk about. That's something
yes.
to look out for.
And we've done a number of episodes on that and about the what we called the woke right. So if the woke left says, like we just said, that there's oppressor versus oppressed, and it's always the whites that are the oppressed, the woke right will say it's always the whites that are being oppressed.
Right.
And so that's why we need to fight against everyone else, and we are the oppressed.
Yeah,
And so they
it
just
seemed like it's victims want to come out and in revenge of the victims.
exactly,
And in
exactly,
one case, it's the liberal, the left wing Muslim black coalition is the victims. In the other case, it's the Christian right,
exactly,
which is the victim. So these are that's the warfare, and people like me are stuck in the middle because
exactly.
we want meritocracy. We want everybody of identity, every identity, to be respected and loved and be given an equal playing field with no biases of towards anybody. And that's how a team becomes successful. You see, you would not consider having the American Olympic team based on identity quotas. You would not want to, like when I was sitting in a Princeton University discussion with these room full of woke people, and they said, "Oh, you are privileged. You should not be people like you are getting into Harvard more than they should because they have better scores." There was this whole business going on. So they would say
Privilege
we
with
should cap the
scores.
quota in Princeton University based on the percentage of people of various identities in this country, and so it should reflect. If Indians are 2%, then the only 2% should get in. That was their theory. So I turned it around and said, how about something like basketball, where blacks are overrepresented, and Indians being short, we are underrepresented. So I would say that I'm the oppressed on the basketball court because the rules of the game, you put the basket too high for me. And therefore, you have made blacks the oppressor. Blacks are the privileged people. This is structural racism. I'm using their terms. This is structural racism against me and against people of Indian origin because you made the rules of the game such that you privilege certain people over others. So I propose that the NBA and same for football and basketball and all of that should put a quota on how many blacks will be there. And you should have, so if you do that, you'll have to fire most of the blacks from basketball because they're overrepresented. And then you have to expand the quota for the Asians, just like in math and science and STEM, you want to do it the other way around. So you see, their logic doesn't work. It works when you cherry pick the arguments, you cherry pick the context and the cases that you want to apply it to. They apply their logic in certain cases, okay, but they are not willing to apply it in things like sports. They're not willing to
Yes.
apply it in things like entertainment where blacks are overrepresented. I'm not against blacks. I want all the good black athletes to do well and all the good actors who are blacks to do well. But I don't want them to say that their domain of expertise is somehow sacrosanct and it should be meritocracy because they'll win. And my domain of expertise, which may be STEM, it should not be meritocracy. How do you decide that? On what basis? This seems like a very illogical policy.
But also, it seems so anti-American in the sense that I remember in the Martin Luther King's famous, content of his character, and then all they do is not look at the content of a person's character, but look at things that are outside of his control. I can control if I was born to a Jewish mother and father. I mean, theoretically, if I wasn't, I could, obviously, become a Jew and do the whole thing, but I was born. That's not in my control. It's not in your control if you were born in India or born somewhere else. You could obviously choose your way in from wherever you want. But a lot of when it's race, you don't pick your race. And so what they do is they instead of judging people by what they do, by the hard work they put in, like meritocracy, but I'm just putting it down to actual things, by their skill set, by their IQ levels, by their willingness to work hard and chip away. They look at you, oh, you're born black, meaning you need a ladder up. That means you're less privileged. Excuse me? Like, why? And one thing that I didn't notice that was like, there's a lot of African Americans that are middle class in America. You don't have. It's not an automatic thing that if you're born African American, you're going to be poor, and it's not an automatic thing if you're born white, you're going to be rich. I
Yeah,
know a
and
lot
there
of
are a
very
lot of
poor white people.
there are a lot of Indians and Hindus who work in as waiters in restaurants and who are
Yeah,
taxi drivers and who work in gas stations. I mean, it's not
exactly.
like everybody is doing very well. It's based on education and based on merit and so on.
Hmm.
So you see, I fully agree with you that America became such a great country on meritocracy. And
Yes,
and that is the brilliance of America to be able to bring in the best people from around the world on meritocracy and give them an equal shot, and some will work out very well, some will not. So that's how that you see the meritocracy should be, the competition should be on an individual level. It should not be on a
exactly.
on an identity level. It should not be that one group is doing collective bargaining against another group. It's not like competing unions. That so that is what bothers me. I have nothing against any religion, any sexual orientation, any race, any of that, as long as each individual is free and equal to go out and compete, win, lose based on merit.
Yes, and that is my next point, which I wanted to talk to you about. So there's a selective way in which they apply this DEI thing, meaning, like we said, there's groups that they'll look at certain areas where those groups are underrepresented, and those are the areas where they'll put the shine the light on. But in the other places where they're overrepresented, like you mentioned, basketball, whatever, there's other places they'll like shy away and not show it or not talk about it or not point out the obvious issues that you pointed out. And it seems to me that Indian people and Jewish Americans, for example, and also and Asians in general, but Indians, we're talking specifically, our two peoples are meeting here. So it seems to me, are being punished by the DEI policies. Jews and Indians seem to be less, except, for example, have to have higher scores than other groups to get into elite universities. Just for an example, right?
Yeah. So it's not, it's actually much worse than that. The DEI has taken this identity quota system and brought it into the HR departments. And
Uh-huh.
these HR departments they started out in universities. They put quotas on admitting students of various kinds and professors and so on. And then even research papers, even journals like Scientific American, very prestigious, have in their policy, they have a DEI, which is, doesn't call it DEI, but they say that a paper's merit will be evaluated partly on the social justice impact. So the word social justice is code word for saying, if you preface your paper that you've submitted by talking about, social policy and being politically correct and give a few statements on that kind, you have a better chance of getting in. Whereas if you just talk about physics, and you're just talking about physics itself, and you're not talking about anything to do with society, then you are not into the social justice rat race. And then it has moved from there to government, to military. It has moved to the corporate sector. So now in the HR departments in the corporate sector, they have quotas. So now, you are going to be the board members and the top management people of every department are going to get their bonus based partly on how well they performed the DEI function. They'll be
Yes.
evaluated on that. And then DEI is ESG. When you look at ESG, environment, society, governance, which is used by investment groups to evaluate the ESG rating of every company, and all these, people like Ernst and Young and PwC and all these people, McKinsey, when they go and evaluate different corporate people and give them a rating for desirability for investment. One of the criteria is their social program. How good
Yes.
are they as a corporate
Their
citizen?
impact.
So they have an ESG rating, and in the S part of ESG, which stands for society, is DEI. So your DEI rating feeds into the ESG rating. And this will determine, if you don't have enough people of a certain identity or whatever, you may not get funding. Your ESG rating is bad, and then McKinsey will come and say, hey, we are the consultant, we'll help you improve your ESG rating, and they'll make more money. First they make money doing the evaluation and giving you a rating, then they find problems and they come back and try to fix the problem and make even more money.
Yes.
So this is a very big racket. The whole DEI has to be dismantled, but there are vested interests from the accounting firms, the audit firms, the consulting firms. They're all into this DEI racket in a very big way. So it's not
Yes.
going to be easy to get rid of it. But I think the pendulum has started swinging against DEI recently.
Yes, and we saw it with the last election. One of the things that, for example, Elon Musk and Vivek spoke about when he was on our show, he said how bad this is, how it's hurting society, and obviously the fact that at the end of the day, China doesn't do DEI.
Right,
China China wants to win. They don't
right,
care about
right,
DEI. They don't care
right,
about all this garbage. They want to win. And if
right,
America wants to win, they need to start doing meritocracy again.
right,
And
right.
that was his point. And Elon said it was evil and all this other stuff, which I tend to agree with. Um, I want to know. We are obviously talking from Israel. I'm in Israel. You're in the U.S. We've been about a year and some months ago. We had the October 7th attack, and I want to say, before just asking you about your perspective, I've been looking and seeing that Hindus in general, but specifically people who are proud to be Hindu. So you have people that they're culturally Hindu. They're not like, it's just like we're culturally Jewish, but we're not observant, sort of thing. But Hindus who are Hindu in the way they think are very supportive of Israel in general, it seems to be. And Prime Minister Modi, for example, of India, I wrote down to myself, he's someone who changed the pendulum just on the way Indian politicians in general always looked at Israel. I remember Modi came to Israel, him and Bibi standing in the beach with their legs in the water all wet. I didn't know how they dried off in the car, but that's for a different day. Why do you think that this has been happening? Why do you think Hindus in general have supported Israel? And it seems more and more in the past, let's say, decade or so.
So I think that basically you've touched upon the main reasons. I think that both communities tend to be logical, right, rational, a lot of emphasis on STEM and a lot of emphasis on education. And parents push their kids hard to do well because, they feel that on meritocracy, that we have to get ahead. So we both these communities have worked hard and gotten success and deserved that success, and not played the identity politics to get ahead as a way to get ahead. So that's a big reason. And there's also common enemies, common
Yes.
opponents, both religion wise and also in terms of the left wing. So maybe you know this or you don't know this, but about 15 or 20 years ago, the Jewish, the chief rabbi of Israel, and the Jew and many other Jewish groups, they approached the Hindus for a summit. And Swami Dayanand Saraswati, who's no more, was the head of the Hindu Dharma Acharya Sabha, which translates as roughly as a kind of a council of Hindu organizations. And he had created this organization with a few hundred Hindu leaders. And so he was considered sort of, they wanted to find out who's sort of like the Pope. And they said there's nobody like the Pope, but this is like a consortium of Hindu organizations, and there is a formal head of that. So this Swamiji, as we called him affectionately, was approached. And so he agreed to this summit, and he asked me to be the scholar, to be with him as the scholar. The two sides would each have religious leaders, but they also wanted to have a certain number of scholars to do the research and provide all the facts and all that. So I was the main Hindu scholar. And so we had Hindu-Jewish Summit. I have the proceedings of that, and I can send you that. It's very fascinating. We had meetings in Delhi. The first meeting was in Delhi. And believe me, in those days, Hindus were so scared that they're bringing in Jews. We did it in the basement of a hotel, as if there's something to be scared about. Because this
Why
was
were
like,
they scared?
because the that was before the Modi era, and the negativity, the Hindus asserting themselves and joining hands with Jews would kind of ruffle the feathers of the leftist media and all that. So we had this first meeting in the basement. Next meeting was in. Then we had meetings in London, New York, and Tel Aviv. So these four meetings were held, and many resolutions were passed. I have the entire book of presentations and talks, and I gave one of the talks there. So I think that was the first, even before Modi, it was the first initiative of bringing religious people together. This is before the political thing happened. And
Mhm.
and of course, this built momentum in a big way, because the Swami, who was the head of the Hindu delegation, was also Modi also considered him his guru. So that
Ah.
obviously played a role later on. So that's sort of, I have been into this for a very long time, and I can say that when you talk to Indians and Hindus privately, who are kind of very open about their views, they will agree with all this, that uh, we need to we need to find common ground and collaborate with Jews, because we have common issues, and Jews are better organized in the United States. We can learn from them. They're better organized. They're better organized in Washington with the politics, with all of that kind of stuff. So I think that Hindus can actually learn from the Jews in certain ways, and vice versa. The Jews can benefit a lot, because number wise, I mean,
Yes.
the Hindu population is large and is going to become very, very large in the Western world and in every part of the world. And there's going to be more and more, Hindu Indians in every segment of society, in most open societies, in every profession. In every profession, whether it's medicine or whether it's technology or whether it's Wall Street or media or whatever, you will find in my generation there's a lot of us, but in the next generation it's even more, and it's going to get more and more. So I
And
think this is,
Rajiv,
yeah.
let me just interject and ask you just to maybe another aspect of this. And you mentioned the common enemies. So I interviewed a Indian businessman not too long ago. I'll send you it. It's an interesting interview. He, after October 7th, the Indian government, what happened was the Palestinian workers who used to work in Israel would go in from the Gaza Strip or from the West Bank, work in Israel, and go back home. And then the war started, so Israel shut down the borders. And then all the workers and the companies here didn't have workers. And so they needed a very fast cooperation with someone who would bring in workers, skilled workers in construction and all these other areas. And the Israeli government went to the British Indian government and asked them to help them out. And so the Indian government went to this guy and a bunch of other businessmen who work in HR in India, and they started working very fast to get Indian workers. And he was very surprised of the amount of enthusiasm that Indians in India, because there's Indians all over the world working in Dubai and in Qatar and in Saudi, and everybody wanted, a lot of them wanted to come to Israel. I don't want to say everyone, but and one of the things that he mentioned, and I asked him, was everyone mentioned attacks in the attacks that happened in forgot that in Delhi, right? The attacks that happened on the on by from Pakistani
Right.
terrorists a few number of years ago, and so it seems to me that we both are fighting just on a practical and ideological level
Yes.
people who want to destroy our societies, people who cannot stand that we live next to them or even amongst them, and we don't believe in what they believe in,
Yeah, I
and they're
think
willing to kill us.
one of the things here to consider is that Judaism and Hinduism are non-proselytizing.
Exactly.
So the deal God gave has nothing to do with getting the other guy in line, because that's his problem. Whether
Hmm.
whether he's in line or not, or whether he's doing the right thing, or whether he's going to heaven, hell, or whatever is his problem. I have to worry about myself. That's the spiritual path. I have to worry about, am I doing the right thing as per my faith? So, but there are proselytizing religions, and it's Christianity and Islam are the two leading proselytizing religions, and so they got a different deal from God. I mean, one day I hope to ask God what the heck is going on, because you gave different deals and different instructions, and it seems like if you are the head of HR, or you appointed certain people in Makkah as the head of HR to spread it around the world, and you appointed certain other people in the Vatican to spread a conflicting HR policy, and then you told the Hindus and the Jews that they should have to follow the right values from themselves and not follow any of those global HR people. So this is kind of a setup for conflict, and so this is. I'm saying it in jest and in good humor, but I actually delve into these as a philosopher of religion, that why is it that some faiths have a mandate, or so they claim, to take over the world, and therefore their idea of merit. You see, we are talking about meritocracy, but their idea of merit is that they're complying with their book, and this is what they're supposed to do. I mean,
Yeah.
if they're doing merit as per God's instructions, then they think it's pretty much merit. So you have to think like about. It's not an easy problem to solve. That's what I'm
Yes,
saying.
but I think the difference between Christians in general, obviously you have we mentioned a lot of the fringes and stuff, but in Islam, even if it is a minority, it's a very large minority. And we've seen just maybe I'll ask you about this because it is interesting, is that in Britain with these grooming gangs lately, the Pakistani descent, which the Indians are neighbors with Pakistan. So these are people that came from India's neighbor and moved to the West, did not change their values, obviously, and sexually assaulted young little underage girls in Britain for years. And nobody did anything about it. That's a different issue. But my point is that they're bringing a lot of their backwards beliefs into the West, into places where we used to think were safe.
Yeah, so I think I mean that's a serious problem, and that's a problem that the Labor Party does not want to even acknowledge, and that was a problem in the Democratic Party in the United States, which got them kicked out. I mean, I really would like the Democratic Party to reinvent itself. I would like two healthy parties. I don't want either party to be destroyed, because you have a good democracy when there's competition in a nice way. And I would like the Democratic Party to stop, blaming others and passing the blame around, and to kind of clear out the leadership from all this old baggage, and clear out these extreme leftist people, and bring in rational centrists who are for America, for meritocracy, for the big tent, and let everybody be there, and quit playing political games of identity, this and versus that. I would like that to happen. If that were to happen, then we'll have Democrats will have a better chance of coming back one day. At least it'll be healthy for the American country. I
Yes.
would also like
Yes.
wish that for every country. I would wish that for Britain and France and Hungary and all kind of Poland. All these countries are having problems. Italy, so Canada. I mean, I don't know what will happen in Canada now with Trudeau gone. But Trudeau was bad news. Trudeau was really
Yes.
extreme guy in all this woke kind of stuff.
Yeah. Rajiv, just on a personal level, I asked you on general why Indians are friends with Israel, with Jews. You spoke about the conferences that you did, which are so important, and in the general coming together, which obviously became into fruition on the political level through brought up through the spiritual level. But maybe just on a personal level, when you saw what happened on October 7th, what were your first initial thoughts? And seeing the protests in America since then, how do you understand what's happening?
Well, my first reaction was that Israel's security failed very badly. And I
Yes.
was very disappointed. I said, this is a country that is supposed to be much better at this thing. And so what happened? I mean, I still haven't figured out what exactly happened. And the fact that the Palestinians and these guys were planning it for a long time, Hamas and all were planning. I mean, this was not some spontaneous, some idiot, some random guy who did it. This must have been planned for a very long time. So there was also intelligence failure. Besides military failure to defend physically, there was also, failure in terms of intelligence. So that was my first reaction. That how could this happen? Who's behind it? Is there some? Obviously it was Iran behind it. So that was my first reaction. Then I was really. Then I started getting into the stories of all the people who are suffering, the rapes, the kidnapping, and the hostages. Then it became more like it's not just a pragmatic issue of failure, but now it's a humanitarian issue. And so that has been troubling me. That is a kind of I mean, it's very difficult to bear watching the plight of these hostages. They're still there.
Yes.
Many of them have died and they're being tortured. So that happened. That was the next kind of experience. Then I started feeling that, okay, the world ought to denounce this, or everybody should denounce it. And it seemed that for a while the world did. But then the left Islam axis got activated, and it got activated on campuses where they have these professors. They can be in any department. They don't have to be in religion department. They could be in some technology department, but they are ideologically like that. And they are like sleeper cells, ideological sleeper cells. They've been at it for a long time, and they have a bunch of think tanks, and they have people in the media. CNN has got a bunch of them, and MSNBC's got a bunch of them. They're on the surface very nice guys and very nice and polite and sweet, and they'll talk like everything is okay. Uh, but deep down, they have this kind of a grudge against Jews, particularly.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
and Hindus are kind of bracketed along with that. So this, when it started overflowing into the campus stuff, I knew that, because that I recognized from my own experience. So when it became a campus movement with so much violence and so much anger and hatred, against the Jews, radical anti-Semitism. I mean, I could tell this is the same group, the same kind of people I've confronted, and this is their day to go out and become important and show off and so on and so forth. So I was, on the one hand, very disgusting, but on the other hand, there was a side of me which said, I told you so. I went around telling my Hindu friends, I told you so for the last 35 years and you were not listening. And
So
now
you
this
weren't
thing has
surprised.
erupted and it's also going to come against us.
Right.
It's also going to come against us. And sure enough, they expanded to include us in all kind of allegations and so on. So the theory that I had been propounding for a long time has come to is undeniable. It's, in other words, nobody today would call me, hey, you're being unreasonably controversial. People used to say you're just being unreasonably controversial. And now nobody, when I talked about DEI for a long time, people would say this. Now there's at least enough mainstream discussion about the problems of DEI. There's mainstream discussions about the problem of Hinduphobia. And, when I started using the term Hinduphobia, Hindus told me, he said, don't use that term, because, what do you mean by Hinduphobia? We're doing so well, and we don't want to claim that we're not doing well. I said, we are doing well materially, But in terms of identity, cultural warfare, we are still we are still very defensive and very hidden and trying to practice it secretly. But when we go out, we don't want to claim that we are Hindus in a proud way. And they said, but why do you have to show off that you're Hindu? I said, it's not about showing off. I mean, Christians are very proud, Jews are very proud, Muslims are very proud. What's the hell wrong? Why can't we be open about it? So now I think in my own community, I'm no longer considered as much a kind of a controversial figure. Now I'm considered, hey, this guy was right. I have so many
Yeah.
people come to me and say, I must tell you, I have to apologize and tell you, all these years we've been very good friends, but in public I wanted to distance myself because I thought you were too controversial. But I now realize that you were right. You're just ahead of your time. So that's how I feel about this whole October 7th. It is very tragic, but it also brought out into the public things that were previously deniable. There was credible deniability, plausible deniability. And so a guy like me who's saying all this is happening had a burden of proof. And now, when I say the same things I've been saying before, people are no longer accusing me of being sensational and so on. People are saying this is really true.
Is, by the way, the fact that more and more people in the Hindu community are saying we have to be proud, like you said, to come out and show, like, not being ashamed of who we are and all this kind of stuff that you just mentioned. Does that have anything to do with the fact that India itself, like we mentioned before, is coming out as we're proud to be Indians? We want to be on the world stage. You want to, show how strong we are, how successful we are as an Indian nation. Does that transcend into Indians and Hindus
Right.
in other countries?
Right. It does because when you are considered successful by people, according to even their criteria of materially successful and whatnot, then you get more confidence and say, hey, you know what, I should be proud of this. When you are poor and you are the underdog and you got very low
Yeah.
level jobs, then you don't want to assert who you are. I mean, that's true. That's human nature. That when that it's actually very human and very natural and normal for everybody to feel proud of their heritage. Everybody has a right to feel proud of their heritage, whatever it is, they feel proud. But you should do it with mutual respect and without hatred towards others and without trying to impose on others. And if a person is not able to assert their pride because of materially being inferior, not very well educated, not having a good job, not enough money, and so on, then it bothers them a lot. It troubles them a lot. And so some people turn to violence and want to bring others down. In the case of Hindus, we didn't turn to violence when we were not doing well. We didn't go out blaming and kicking ass and trying to bring other people down and becoming terrorists. We said, let's work hard. Let's educate our
Yes.
kids. And let's play the game and let's beat them at the game. So I think the Hindus have done well following the path of peace and education and merit in order to achieve what we have achieved.
Rajiv, lastly, just in a general sense, we know we started off with the question about the election in the U.S. and the turmoil all over the West. We came back to it in a different, but and India being strong and stronger and Hindu, all this stuff that we spoke about. Are you optimistic looking forward in I'd say, the near to middle future, or are you sort of, a pessimist at heart?
Well, I have serious concerns. I have serious concerns that the United States may be too late in combating China because China has a huge lead in many critical technologies and many critical materials that are rare, and in AI and in the production of ships and all those kind of things. Missiles and a whole lot of stuff. They've really built up momentum, and we are underestimating how strong they are. So
Hmm.
we finally woken up to China as the big threat. As far as the Islam threat is concerned, I mean, I have nothing against individual Muslims. I have a lot of Muslim friends, and I like them, and they're wonderful people. But as an organized political, military is a kind of organization with an agenda to take over the world, I don't like it. And I think that is not necessarily going to get much better. However, some silver linings are that some of the Middle East countries, like UAE, have opened up, and it seems to be liberal. There's now a Hindu temple there.
In the
And
UAE, there's a Hindu temple.
Yeah, there's a Hindu temple there, in UAE, and there's a now Saudi Arabia it says that they want to liberalize. They got women in bathing suits, and they can drive, and they can go to schools, and they can get educated. So the I think the leadership in some Arab countries, and not in Iran and so on, but in some Arab countries, and not in all of them, have realized that in order to survive and live, they cannot live. In order to
The
modernize,
Middle Ages.
they cannot live in the Middle Ages, and then they're jealous of the West being ahead of them in terms of success, and they don't like that success, and they cannot rely on God's mandate as the only way that they'll get ahead. They have realized that they need to modernize. And to modernize, they have to have science, technology, open it up, and encourage industry to come in, investments to come in. So I would think that the silver lining could be a revolution from within. Because,
Mm,
you and I, as outsiders, cannot transform and fight a war and beat them. That's not going to happen. It's only for Muslims themselves to come to terms with the fact that, okay, they've gone too far in certain ways, and they need to self-correct. So
yes.
this is what has to happen. Now, I would wish that there would be Palestinians thinking like that also. I wish they were. But unfortunately, either they don't exist, or if they exist, they're not in power. Somehow, the radical elements seem to have taken power. I mean, that's what's happened. So that's my overall view of the future. I think that's a hopeful thing that could happen within the Middle East, from within those countries. And as far as the United States is concerned, it's extremely important for this Doge people and the technocrats to succeed in competing against China in a serious way. And India has its own issues and problems, both external and internal. India is a whole discussion by itself we can have someday.
Yes. I want to say that I want to invite you on in let's say 2-3 months, so we can talk about just Hindu. You mentioned before we started recording. I'm going to give you guys inside information here about Hinduism and how it's perceived by people from outside, and also about India internally. So I want to. Hopefully, we'll have another talk, because we've been talking so much about current events that I think a lot of what happens currently has to do with deeper things behind that we don't usually see above the surface. So I think those are important issues to talk about. And so right now we don't have a lot of time, so I don't want to also keep you. I know you're a very busy man. So I want to say that Rajiv Malhotra, it was a very big honor to speak with you. I have to also say that I think your insights are important because, like you said, you're not someone who's like an ideological right wing extremist in American stuff. You're a former Democrat. You're someone who's coming in from the outside, like you're in touch with people outside of America and India, and you're able to like see things from inside and from with outside. So from outside, so it's important to get your perspective. I have to say also that I got a little bit of helping with from Yeshayahu Rosenman. I promised him I'll mention his name, from the India Israel Maitri project. He helped me out a little bit with like knowing you. So I read a little bit about you before we spoke about. So I want to say thank you so much for being with us. It was a pleasure. Um, and I want to say to my audience that any questions you guys might have, I will forward it to Rajiv. So if they're good. Uh, and Rajiv, we're gonna put this interview up late after the inauguration. So I want to say that I hope you enjoy yourself at the inauguration. Say hi to President Trump for us. We're all wishing for success here in Israel. He got like 80% of the votes in the polls. 80% of Israelis wanted him to be elected. So I think it means a lot. And thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and I would like to come back and explain kind of Hinduism 101 for Jews. I do that a
Yes,
lot with friends, and they love it. They love it because it
we're going to do
clarifies.
it.
And
I,
I'd love to do that because you asked very good questions. And thank you very much
so,
for having me.
Rajiv, we're going to do it. I will hold you to it, and we'll be in touch personally, and we'll get this done. So, but first of all, go to the inauguration, get the official political stuff out of the way, and then we'll talk about the deeper stuff. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for tuning in to the Western Spirit podcast. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an episode. See you next time.